My dad suspended me until I apologized to my golden child sister. I just replied, "All right." The next morning, she smirked, until she saw my empty desk and resignation letter. The company lawyer burst in, "ASHEN, tell me you didn't post it." And what followed shattered everything they built. They thought they had silenced me, punished me for daring to speak the truth. What they didn't know was that their betrayal had just unlocked the one thing they never expected: my freedom to burn down the lies they'd built. To understand how everything truly unraveled, how my quiet defiance became a roaring fire, we have to go back to the beginning. Not the day I walked out of that boardroom, that was just the grand finale. No, the real story started much earlier, in a house that felt more like a corporate headquarters, a home where ambition was the air we breathed and medicine was our family's entire universe. My parents, formidable in their own right, built Hartwell Medical Group from a single clinic into a regional powerhouse. Our dinner table wasn't for idle chatter, it was a strategy session, a battlefield of mergers and market shares. And from day one, my older sister, Camila, was the chosen one. The glossy hospital brochure come to life. Bright, charismatic, beautiful, she charmed everyone from nurses to wealthy donors. Adults would lean down, pat her shoulder, and whisper, "There she is, the natural heir to Hartwell." They said it so often, Camila started to believe it was etched into her very DNA. I was the opposite. The quiet one, happiest in the library, fluent in numbers, not applause. I didn't cry easily, and I certainly didn't make scenes. My father described me as reliable, like a filing cabinet or a lab freezer, useful, structured, but entirely forgettable until a problem arose. Math problems, tax documents, insurance forms, anything technical or tedious invariably landed on my lap. "Elena can handle it," they'd say, and I always could. But every success I had, every problem I quietly solved, seemed to vanish into the background. Meanwhile, Camila's mere attempts at anything were celebrated like major victories. When I won my first statewide science award, Dad congratulated me, then immediately pivoted. "You know, your sister helped us secure that new pediatric partner today. That's the kind of impact that takes the hospital higher." When I earned a full scholarship to college, he told the neighbors how proud he was, but somehow the conversation always drifted back to Camila's burgeoning charisma. And when I got into law school, specializing in healthcare compliance, of all things, he shook my hand and then declared, "Camila's leadership instincts, that's what will shape our future." It was as if my achievements existed solely to frame hers, to provide a backdrop for her spotlight. The only person who ever saw me, the real me, was my mom. She was my quiet champion, the one who stayed up late for science fairs, who tucked handwritten notes into my textbooks, who whispered, "You don't need applause to be exceptional, Konu." She was the silent, steady balance to my father's relentless ambition. And then, 5 years ago, cancer took her. Swiftly, cruelly, without warning. That was the moment our family finally tipped. With Mom gone, Dad clung to Camila like a life raft, as if spotlighting her could somehow fill the gaping void Mom left behind. Camila absorbed the attention effortlessly. She was built for it. I, on the other hand, became the silent receptacle for every frustration, every miscommunication, every fracture in the empire they were so desperate to hold together. It didn't matter that I was the one quietly fixing operational problems no one else even noticed. It didn't matter that I could walk through Hartwell's labyrinthine back end and see every weak link before it snapped. To Dad, I was the daughter who didn't need him, the one who would always be fine on her own. And that, somehow, became his permission to overlook me entirely. By the time I graduated law school and returned to Hartwell Medical, my role was painfully clear. I was the technical architect, the behind-the-scenes builder, the one who ensured the structure didn't collapse. Camila was the face on the brochures, the one charming donors, the media darling. At family galas, Dad introduced her with a proud hand on her back. Our future chief growth officer. When it was my turn, he'd gesture vaguely toward the operations team and say something like, "And Elena keeps us compliant and organized." It felt like the verbal equivalent of patting a dog on the head. Even within the company, the hierarchy was glaring. I wrote policies. Camilla cut ribbons. I negotiated complex legal frameworks. She posed for photos. I kept the hospital out of scandals. She was celebrated for expanding the brand. And every time someone asked why I wasn't on stage with her, Dad would chuckle lightly and say, "Oh, Elena prefers to stay behind the curtain. That's where she does her best work." I did my best work, yes, but not because I preferred to be hidden. It was because someone always made sure I stayed there. Looking back, the boardroom, the suspension, the smirk, it wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the final, echoing crescendo of a childhood structured around a single, immutable rule: Camilla shines, and Elena supports. Slight pause, then a direct, engaging gaze at the camera, midway subscribe line *hey. Before we dive deeper into how everything completely unraveled, if you're still with me, please hit that subscribe button. Trust me, the story only gets wilder from here. Transition back to a more intense, dramatic shot. By 32, my place within Hartwell Medical had crystallized into something both undeniable and invisible. I was the Chief Compliance and Risk Officer, a title that sounded heavy on paper but felt strangely weightless in a family that measured worth by headlines and photo ops. Still, I poured myself into the work, not to impress them, but because someone had to care about the parts no one else wanted to see. I built the compliance division from the ground up. When I first arrived, Hartwell's systems were a dangerous patchwork of outdated policies and half-finished software. Over the years, I reconstructed everything: risk matrices, quality controls, HIPAA safeguards, whistleblower channels, and real-time monitoring that actually flagged unethical patterns before they could metastasize. My work wasn't glamorous, but it was the reason Hartwell managed to avoid 3 catastrophic lawsuits that could have bled the entire network dry. A surgeon's unnecessary procedure pattern caught early. A department double billing for anesthesia units shut down before the insurer even noticed. A data breach attempt aimed at our pediatric clinic blocked because of a firewall protocol I'd insisted on upgrading. The federal inspections that used to make administrators sweat bullets eventually became routine, almost boring. Our scores climbed into the top tier, and the inspectors started calling Hartwell a model system. But outside my small department, hardly anyone knew why. Nurses and medical assistants trusted me in a way they didn't trust the execs. They whispered concerns to me because they knew I wouldn't force them into pushing unnecessary tests to improve revenue. I'd protected more than patients. I'd protected the people actually doing the healing. Meanwhile, Camilla was busy becoming the undisputed face of Hartwell. While I worked through dry policies, she crafted sleek billboards, social media campaigns, and a fast-track wellness program designed to lure younger patients with the promise of quick, low-cost diagnostics. She was on TV at least twice a month, talking about growth trajectories and patient-centered branding. Her hair was always perfect, her voice always bright. Local magazines wrote features on her. The visionary behind Hartwell's expansion, Colorado's rising healthcare star, the woman reimagining modern medicine. And with every article, my father's quotes grew more extravagant. "Camilla is the strategic heart of Hartwell," he told one reporter, as if reading from a script he'd rehearsed for years. "She inherited her mother's grace and my instinct for leadership." I would scroll through these articles quietly, always noticing the single line where my name occasionally appeared. "And after that, Elena Hartwell oversees compliance operations." No details, no recognition, just a line that sounded like I kept track of filing cabinets. The irony was almost comical. Camilla built the image. I'd built the infrastructure that kept that image from collapsing. But in Hartwell Medical, and in my father's mind, the image was the empire. So Camilla rose, and I held the ladder steady beneath her, unseen. The gap between us widened with every gala speech, every board luncheon, every partnership announcement featuring her smiling face. At work, it became routine. She'd walk into meetings late, offer bold but shallow ideas, then leave early for media appearances. I stayed behind to translate her vague promises into something legally survivable. People assumed I preferred the shadows. They didn't realize I'd been raised there. Then, one night, that truth hit me harder than usual. It was past 11 p.m., and the hospital halls had settled into that eerie quiet only medical buildings truly know, steady beeping monitors, rolling carts in the distance, the occasional intercom announcement. I was in my glass-walled office, surrounded by risk reports spread across my desk like a battlefield map. A discrepancy in the quarterly coding numbers had caught my eye earlier, and I couldn't let it go. Patterns never lied. People did. My eyes were dry, my ponytail falling apart, and my dinner was a forgotten protein bar under a stack of papers. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, and glanced out the window toward the visitor parking structure. That's when I saw her. Camila, laughing with two marketing staffers, strutting across the lot in her tailored coat, heels clicking like she was on a runway. The hospital had just bought her a new electric sports car as a retention incentive. Its headlights flared as she unlocked it, casting a brilliant white glow across the concrete. She slid into the driver's seat, hair glowing under the street lamps, and zipped away into the night like the star of a movie. I watched her tail lights fade into the dark, my office lights reflecting faintly in the glass. Me inside, still working, still holding everything together, still invisible. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest fissure open inside me. A quiet recognition that no matter how much I built, protected, or repaired, I would always be the daughter who keeps things organized. The daughter behind the curtain. The daughter they assumed would never walk away. They had no idea how close they were to being wrong. Transition to a more intense, focused shot, perhaps lit from below to create shadow. The night I saw Camila glide out of the parking lot in her brand new sports car, I had no idea how quickly the shine of her latest victory would rot once I dug beneath the surface. The first crack appeared 2 days later during what should have been a routine internal audit of our new insurance partnership. The very same deal Camila proudly paraded across every news outlet in Colorado. On paper, the deal was dazzling: increased reimbursements, expanded coverage, streamlined billing. But the moment I opened the contract file and started reviewing the appendices, something twisted in my stomach. The language was too polished, too vague in the places that mattered, too generous in all the wrong ways. I'd seen this pattern before. I'd also watched hospitals collapse because of it. The deeper I read, the more the contract revealed its teeth. Hidden within the reimbursement structure was a clause that subtly encouraged upcoding, assigning higher-paying diagnostic codes for conditions that weren't that severe. Another section incentivized physicians to extend patient stays under the guise of enhanced observation, even when patients were clinically ready for discharge. And then there was the quota, a chilling line tucked beneath a table of performance metrics. If Hartwell failed to meet projected revenue increases, the insurance partner could impose financial penalties or withhold bonus reimbursements. It was the kind of clause written by people who understood exactly how to weaponize desperation. Beneath the glossy branding Camila sold to the press, this wasn't a partnership. It was a trap, one that could destroy both patients and staff. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I spent the next week quietly gathering context. By the third day, 2 residents, stressed and hesitant, knocked on my door. They closed it behind them and fidgeted with their ID badges. "Dr. Hartwell," one whispered, "we're being pushed to order way more imaging than we normally would. Labs, too. Stuff that doesn't make sense clinically." The other nodded. "Our attending said it's part of the new initiative to strengthen reimbursements. We're uncomfortable." They didn't say Camila's name, but they didn't have to. Her fingerprints were all over anything that promised revenue jumps. After they left, I opened the analytics dashboard and pulled data from the past 6 months. At first glance, everything looked normal. Until I filtered by department. That's when the pattern hit like a punch to the ribs. Diagnostic imaging volume had spiked 40%. Overnight observation stays had jumped in 3 different clinics. High-severity billing codes appeared in places that had never used them before. Even more disturbing, the changes began exactly 1 week after Camila's partnership contract went into effect. Patterns don't lie. People do. I dug deeper: email logs, meeting transcripts, billing team memos. And then I found it. The smoking gun. An internal email chain from Camila to the billing department, marked high priority. It read, "We need to be more flexible with coding to protect revenue flows during the first 2 quarters. If a condition falls into a gray area, code upward. We must demonstrate strong financial performance to maintain leverage with our insurance partners. Let's do what's necessary, smiley face. Flexible. Gray area. Do what's necessary." It was textbook corporate fraud, dressed up in marketing language, and she had signed it with a smiley face. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, feeling something sharp and ice-cold settle in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't sloppy execution. It was a deliberate, systemic scheme. And if federal auditors found it before we self-reported, Hartwell Medical wouldn't just face fines. We could lose insurance contracts, face criminal exposure, and implode. And because I was chief compliance and risk, the blame would land squarely on my shoulders. That night, I stayed in my office until after midnight, preparing what would become an 80-page internal report. It outlined every irregularity, every inflated code, every policy violation, every data trend that pointed to coordinated insurance fraud. I triple-checked every citation, every appendix, every time-stamped email. When I finally submitted the report, I didn't send it quietly. I sent it to my father, the board, and the ethics committee simultaneously. I attached a formal recommendation: 1. Immediate suspension of the fast-track reimbursement initiative. 2. A full independent audit. 3. Voluntary disclosure to regulators and insurance partners. Within an hour, my father called an emergency meeting. He didn't even look at me as I walked into the conference room. Camila was already there, red-faced and seething. The instant Dad finished skimming the report, she exploded. "Are you out of your mind? Do you realize what you've done? You're sabotaging everything Dad and I built. You always do this. You look for problems because you don't know how to handle success." Her voice echoed off the glass walls. The executives stared at the table. My father finally looked up at me, but there was no warmth, no confusion, only disappointment, polished into something sharper. "Elena," he said slowly, "why do you insist on making everything so complicated?" Complicated. That was the word he had used my entire life. Not careful, not thorough, not ethical, just complicated. Behind his tone was an accusation older than either of our job titles, that I was the daughter who always created storms where he wanted sunshine, the reason harmony broke. That if I just kept quiet, just looked away, just let it slide, everything would be easier. But easier for whom? For Camila? For him? For a hospital that was slowly turning into a machine that squeezed money out of people who trusted us. I looked at the man who taught me to take care of patients before profits. And for the first time, I realized he didn't want the truth. He wanted obedience. And that was the moment something inside me went still. Not angry, not hurt, just still, like the calm before something irreversible. They didn't know it yet, but they had already lost me. Close up on narrator's face, conveying a quiet, steely resolve, the emergency board meeting felt less like a professional gathering and more like a tribunal arranged for a predetermined verdict. I walked into that glass-walled conference room with my binder of evidence tucked under my arm, still foolishly believing that data, ethics, and law would somehow matter. They didn't. Not in that room. Not with those people. The board members sat stiffly, their eyes flicking between their printed copies of my 80-page report and my father's expression, as if waiting for cues on how outraged they were supposed to be. My father stood at the head of the table, hands braced against the polished wood, jaw tight. Camila sat beside him, arms crossed, her expression a perfect blend of triumph and wounded innocence. When my father finally spoke, he didn't mention the fraudulent coding, the inflated stay durations, or the smoking gun emails. He focused instead on something else entirely. "This report," he said, holding the document between 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, "has created unnecessary panic among staff. It's damaged team morale, undermined leadership, and jeopardized key relationships with our partners. In that moment, I realized they weren't angry that the scheme existed. They were angry that I had exposed it. One board member cleared his throat. "Elena, we expect our executives to present solutions, not negativity." Another added, "Tone matters. This kind of aggressive critique can destabilize an entire department." I stared at them, unable to process how they managed to twist evidence of potential felony fraud into a conversation about my tone. Then my father delivered the final blow, with the solemnity of someone pretending to hate what he was about to say. "Elena, you leave us no choice. Effective immediately, you are suspended for 30 days without pay." He paused, letting the words settle, watching for signs that I might crumble. "And," he continued, "before returning, you will submit a handwritten apology to the board and to Camila, acknowledging your role in damaging team trust and your commitment to focusing on constructive paths forward rather than divisive criticism." Constructive paths forward. Divisive criticism. They were using corporate jargon to wallpaper over a moral collapse. Across the table, our CFO sat frozen, his gaze fixed on me. He knew everything in my report was accurate. He also knew that siding with me would cost him his job, maybe his career, so he stayed silent. Fear had eaten whatever integrity he once had. I scanned each face at the table and realized something that felt like a slow, cold exhale inside my chest. These people aren't capable of saving what's broken here. And if I stayed, I would drown with them. Outwardly, I looked like the one being punished, humiliated, isolated, painted as a saboteur. But internally, for the first time in years, something rose in me like a quiet, undeniable peak. I felt free. I lifted my eyes to meet my father's. "All right," I said, my voice steady. He blinked, taken aback by the absence of resistance. "You want to suspend me?" "Suspend me? You want an apology? You'll have a written one." The board seemed relieved, convinced I was folding, confused by how easily I accepted the punishment. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't acceptance. It was departure. As I picked up my binder, Camila leaned close, her whisper dripping with condescension. "You'll never win, Elena. This company is in my DNA. Dad will always choose me." Her certainty would have stung once. It didn't anymore. I offered her a small, almost gentle smile, the kind you give someone who has no idea what's coming. Because in that room, in that exact moment, I made my choice. I would stop trying to save Hartwell Medical from the inside. I would stop trying to save my family's legacy. I would save the patients instead. I walked out of the boardroom without looking back, my footsteps echoing down the polished hallway. They thought they had silenced me. What they had actually done was unlock the one thing they never expected. My freedom to burn down the lies they built and walk away untouched. Scene shifts to a quiet, dimly lit apartment, emphasizing Elena's isolation but also her resolve. That night, my apartment felt smaller than it had in years. The walls too close, the air too still, the silence too loud. I sat on the couch without turning the lights on, the glow from the Denver skyline casting long shadows across my living room. My suspension paperwork lay on the coffee table, the ink still fresh, my father's signature bold and decisive. For the first time all day, the question I had been running from finally settled in front of me, heavy and terrifying. If I report this, will I destroy the very company my mother helped build? The company she believed in, the company I had spent half my life protecting? My chest tightened. Hartwell Medical wasn't just an employer. It was childhood dinners, lost weekends, memories of my mother walking the halls with her soft, tired smile. Filing a whistleblower claim felt like setting fire to a family photo album. But doing nothing? That was something else entirely. Doing nothing meant complicity. I stared at my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, smudged eyeliner, hair pulled back in a messy knot. For years, I'd held this empire together. Tonight, it felt like the empire was holding me hostage. My phone buzzed. The contact name read, "Amy Lynn, Ethical Compliance Symposium." I had met her 6 months earlier at a federal seminar on healthcare whistleblowing. She was sharp, direct, and unafraid to challenge broken systems. I'd kept her card in my drawer, just in case, never imagining I would actually need it. My fingers trembled only slightly as I dialed. She picked up on the second ring. "Elena, you okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice a whisper. "I think I'm about to do something that could destroy everything my family built." There was a long pause. "Tell me what you found." I laid it all out: the contract, the coded pressure, the inflated diagnostics, Camila's emails, the board's retaliation, my father's suspension. Amy didn't gasp or panic. She just inhaled slowly. "Elena, listen. There's a federal whistleblower program for healthcare fraud. It protects you from retaliation, financially and legally. And if I stay quiet?" My voice cracked. "If someone else uncovers this later?" She didn't soften the truth. "If this blows up, and it will, you, as Chief Compliance Officer, will be the first person investigators scrutinize. Silence won't protect you. Reporting will." I closed my eyes. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Elena," she continued gently, "I know you're afraid, but you're not the one destroying Hartwell. You're the one trying to save the part that's still worth saving." When we hung up, the fear didn't disappear, but it did crystallize into clarity, a cold, steady kind of resolve. I stood and walked to my bedroom closet. Behind a stack of old textbooks and winter coats sat a small fireproof safe. I'd opened it only twice since Mom died. My hands shook as I entered the combination. Inside were documents sealed in plastic, a string of pearls my mother used to wear, and a letter addressed in her delicate handwriting. "For Elena." I sank to the floor, pulse hammering. Before opening the letter, I called my mother's sister, my Aunt Rachel, in Seattle. She picked up half asleep, but alert the moment she heard my voice. "Elena, honey, what's wrong?" "Aunt Rachel." My throat tightened. "I think Dad and Camila are using the hospital to commit insurance fraud." Her silence was immediate, sharp. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with something I never heard from her before: anger. "Elena, your mother suspected that one day the hospital might drift away from its purpose." "What are you talking about?" There was the creak of a chair as she sat up fully. "Elena, your mother left behind a trust. 22% of the Hartwell shares. She placed it under your name." My breath hitched. "WH what?" "Dad never said." "He doesn't know," Rachel cut in. "Your mother didn't trust him to use it fairly, and she certainly didn't trust Camila. The trust gives voting rights exclusively to you. Elena, you are a controlling shareholder." The room spun around me. Me, not Camila, not my father. Me, and Rachel sighed softly. "Your mother told me, Elena is the only one who will choose patience over profit. If Hartwell ever becomes something I don't recognize, she'll be the one to stop it." Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. After the call ended, I finally opened my mother's letter. Her handwriting curled like the gentle cadence of her voice. "If Hartwell Medical ever becomes a place your heart no longer recognizes, you have the right and the responsibility to stop it. Not through loyalty to us, but through loyalty to the people we meant to serve." At the bottom, a familiar phrase. "Do what's right, Kona. Not what's easy." Mom had known. She had seen the future long before I did, and she had armed me for it. By the time I stood up, a deep, trembling peace had formed inside me. The kind of peace that only comes when a decision is already made. I returned to my desk, turned on my laptop, and opened the secure federal whistleblower portal. Then I opened the confidential shareholder platform used by non-executive stakeholders. One file at a time, I began uploading the internal report, Camila's emails, the statistical spreadsheets, the contract excerpts, the audit logs, everything they hoped would stay hidden. The progress bar crept forward slowly, each percentage point a quiet betrayal of the empire that had shaped my entire life. But for once, I wasn't choosing my family. I was choosing the truth. And when the final file uploaded with a soft, decisive ding, I whispered to the empty room. "All right. Fast-paced editing, quick cuts between Camila's confidence, Dad's office, James's frantic entrance, and Elena's serene face. Building tension with sound effects, morning arrived with a strange, deceptive calm. The sort of thin, pale light that slips through the curtains before the world realizes it's about to change. While I sat at my kitchen counter, sipping black coffee and refreshing my inbox every few minutes for a confirmation email from the federal portal, the other side of the city was waking up to a very different kind of morning. At Hartwell Medical Group, Camila walked through the executive entrance in 4-inch heels, humming to herself. She'd chosen a jewel-toned suit that photographed well under fluorescent lights because today she planned to lead a hand-picked group of local reporters through the hospital's record-breaking revenue initiative. The same initiative built on fraudulent coding, manufactured patient stays, and manipulation she'd proudly wrapped in bright marketing ribbon. Her assistant hurried beside her, carrying a stack of printed talking points. Camila barely glanced at them. "She'll be fine," she waved off. "I just need to make sure Dad sees the media buzz before the board meeting next week." In her mind, she had already won. She had taught her annoying little sister a lesson. She had secured the contract of her career. She had Dad singing her praises to every journalist in Colorado. Nothing, not even a 30-day suspension, was going to dim the spotlight she lived under. She reached the executive floor, still smiling. And then everything stopped. At the far end of the hallway, across from the frosted glass conference room, sat my office. Or rather, what used to be my office. The door was open. The lights were off. The desk was empty. Completely empty. Not a pen, not a sticky note, not a framed photo, not even the coffee mug Camila once mocked for being too plain. Just one envelope, placed carefully in the center of the polished wood, my resignation letter. The company laptop sat beside it, powered down. My badge had been deactivated overnight. The access logs would show my keycard going dark at exactly 2:30 a.m., the moment I walked out for the last time. A few doors away, my father stood in a small internal meeting room, holding the printed resignation letter with both hands. His eyes traced the lines over and over, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something he could accept. He had expected a fight, expected tears or anger or bargaining, expected me to plead for fairness like a child craving approval. What he got instead was 4 sharply written paragraphs and a signature that didn't tremble. His hand shook now. He didn't notice Camila approaching until she saw his face and frowned. "Dad, it's just Elena. She'll get over it. It's dramatic, but—" Before she could finish, the door slammed open. James Powell, Hartwell's general counsel, barreled into the room at full speed, hair disheveled, tie crooked, his face drained of all color. He looked like a man running from a burning building. He pointed to the letter in Dad's hand, then looked at me, or rather, the absence of me. "Tell me," he gasped, "that she didn't upload it." My father blinked, confused. "Upload what?" "The report," James choked out. "The evidence, the emails, the data logs, the audit trail. She had enough material to trigger a federal investigation. Tell me she didn't submit it to the whistleblower portal. Tell me she didn't." I stepped into the doorway. James's eyes landed on me like he'd seen a ghost, and I said, with the calmest voice I'd used in years, "I submitted everything. Fully documented, properly formatted, and time-stamped. The federal portal has already acknowledged receipt." James sank into the nearest chair. Camila's face twisted. You what?" I ignored her and continued, turning to my father. "As the voting authority for my mother's trust, which holds 22% of Hartwell's shares, I have formally requested that the independent board committee initiate an internal investigation immediately." The silence that followed was not the expensive, polished silence of boardrooms. It was the stunned, yawning silence of a cliff cracking before it collapses. My father's lips parted. "Voting authority? Elena, what are you talking about?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Mom didn't trust you or Camila to protect the hospital's ethics. She trusted me." Then the sound started. At first, just one ping from the iPad in the corner. Then another. And another. And suddenly, like a chain reaction, every device in the room began vibrating, pinging, ringing, phones, tablets, laptops, the wall-mounted board screen. Notifications flooded in. Asterisk ding. 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 Asterisk James looked at his phone and paled even further. "It's the Office of Inspector General," he whispered. "They've confirmed a whistleblower submission involving Hartwell Medical." Another ping. "The independent board members, they're calling for an emergency session." Ping. "Camila is barred from attending." Ping. "Compliance freeze order. All financial activities under review." Ping. "Insurance partners requesting clarification on coding discrepancies." It was like watching a dam rupture in real time. Camila reached for my arm, desperate now. "Elena, stop it! Fix it! You can fix this! Your compliance! You know how to make things disappear!" I stepped back. "I'm not your cleanup crew anymore." My father looked like someone had taken a scalpel to the foundation of his world. "Elena, please. We can discuss this. Not like this. Not." I held up a hand. "No. For years you told me to stay quiet, to be supportive, to avoid making things messy." I gestured to the barrage of alerts exploding across the room. "This is what happens when you choose silence over integrity." And then the final, impossible to ignore notification appeared on the boardroom screen. "Independent Board Resolution. Emergency investigatory hearing today, 3 p.m. Mandatory appearance, CEO Hartwell. Exclusion, Chief Growth Officer Camila Hartwell. Subject of review." Camila gasped like she couldn't breathe. My father sat down slowly, the resignation letter still in his hand. And I walked out. Steady, collected, unbroken. Knowing this was only the beginning. Scene shifts to the formal, bare conference room. Elena sitting in her designated chair, calm, composed. Others are tense. The emergency hearing was held behind the heaviest doors in the executive wing, thick oak, soundproofed, the kind of doors meant to shield powerful men from consequences. But today, nothing inside that room could be shielded. When I entered, the atmosphere was already tense, thick enough to taste. The long conference table, usually set with sparkling water and curated fruit bowls, was stripped bare. No hospitality, no polish, just scrutiny. My father sat at the head of the table, shoulders squared, but I could see the subtle trembling beneath his facade. Camila sat beside him, eyes wide and rimmed with smeared mascara, her composure cracked clean through. On the opposite side were two independent board members, both stone-faced, and James Powell, the general counsel, flipping through printed pages with the dread of someone preparing for an autopsy. There was one empty seat waiting for me, not as an employee, not as the chief compliance officer they had suspended, but as a voting shareholder, the legal voice my mother had left behind. I took the seat without greeting anyone. The senior board member, Miss Albright, adjusted her glasses and began without ceremony. "We have convened this closed session to review evidence submitted to federal authorities and to evaluate internal misconduct involving Hartwell Medical Group. Miss Hartwell," she nodded toward me, "is here as a voting representative of the Lynn Hartwell Trust." My father bristled. "She is also my daughter." Miss Albright didn't blink. "Today, she is a shareholder. Nothing more." Camila shifted uncomfortably. The board members began reading through the documentation on the table. My 80-page internal report, annotated emails, data graphs, timelines, risk assessments. The silence twisted until it snapped. Mr. Farrar, the second independent board member, dropped Camila's printed email onto the table. "This message instructing the billing team to code upward to protect cash flow. Is this your directive, Ms. Hartwell?" Camila swallowed hard. It was a suggestion, a motivational note. It wasn't meant literally. "It resulted in systemic falsification of medical codes," he said flatly. "Patients were miscategorized. Billing records inflated. Insurance fraud indicators triggered across 3 departments. My father slammed a hand on the table. You're taking this out of context. Camila is young. She's still learning. Miss Albright held up another page. These signatures approving the program expansion. These are yours, Dr. Hartwell? He stiffened. I sign off on dozens of strategic initiatives every week. I trust my team. You trusted your daughter, I said quietly. His head whipped toward me. Elena, don't you dare. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You trusted her so blindly that you didn't notice she was turning Hartwell into a machine built to squeeze money out of patients who trusted us. You let her treat state and federal law like they were optional, like they were PR suggestions. The room froze. My father stood abruptly, pointing a shaking finger at me. You are destroying everything I built. Everything your mother believed in. You think you're saving this place? You are burning it to the ground. I stood too, matching his height, but not his volume. Dad, you destroyed it the moment you let Camila play CEO because she smiled for the cameras. You destroyed it when you stopped looking at patients and started looking only at branding. You destroyed it the moment you valued profit more than the law. He flinched, and for the first time, I saw fear, not of me, but of losing the empire he'd sacrificed everything for. The general counsel cleared his throat shakily. With federal regulators now involved, Hartwell is exposed to criminal and civil penalties. Potential exclusion from Medicare and insurance networks. We could lose contracts, face public sanctions. Camila gasped. Criminal? That's not my fault. I did what Dad told me. He always said growth was the priority. He said I had the instincts. Camila! Miss Albright interrupted sharply. This is not the moment to redirect blame. Camila's mouth snapped shut. The board members exchanged glances, and then the verdict came. Not emotional, not dramatic, simply administrative. In the interest of protecting Hartwell Medical Group during the federal review, Miss Albright began. We are implementing the following measures effective immediately. 1. Dr. Hartwell will step down as CEO for the duration of the investigation. 2. Ms. Camila Hartwell will be suspended from all leadership roles and restricted from contact with billing, finance, or compliance departments. 3. Ms. Elena Hartwell is invited to serve as an independent compliance advisor to assist with restructuring. The room held its breath. My father stared at me, ghost pale. You planned this. You wanted my downfall. I shook my head. I wanted accountability. I wanted safety for our patients. I wanted us to honor the values you and Mom raised me with. My voice softened. You chose not to. Camila's chair scraped violently as she stood. Don't pretend you're the hero, Elena. You've always been jealous. You hate that Dad believed in me. I turned to her. If Dad believed in you, he should have taught you responsibility, not encouraged your recklessness. He should have taught you the law, not how to skirt it. Her face crumpled. Miss Albright looked at me again. Your guidance would help stabilize this organization. Will you assist us? The answer was already there, waiting, solid and clear. No, I said. I will fully cooperate with federal investigators. But cleaning up the mess? That's the job of the people who spent 5 years pretending the mess didn't exist. The words dropped like stones into the silence. The board nodded. They didn't argue. They didn't plead. They understood. Camila's breathing turned shallow, almost panicked. My father collapsed back into his chair, grief settling onto his shoulders like a decade's worth of weight. And I walked out of the closed door hearing, not as the scapegoat, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the person holding the one thing they never imagined I'd have, power, and the willingness to use it. Transition to a softer, more hopeful scene, perhaps Elena walking a dog in nature, or in her new, well-lit office. 9 months passed. Months that reshaped everything Hartwell Medical had claimed to be, everything my father believed he controlled, and everything I once allowed myself to carry alone. Federal investigations moved swiftly, almost ruthlessly. Once the whistleblower files were opened, the evidence spoke louder than any press release Camila had ever posed for. The findings were clear: systematic upcoding, manipulated patient stays, financial misrepresentation, and executive negligence. Hartwell Medical was hit with fines so staggering they made local headlines for weeks. Insurance partners severed contracts. Regulators placed the entire network under compliance monitoring. To avoid total collapse, the board made the only move left. They sold a majority of Hartwell's shares to a non-profit hospital consortium, one known for prioritizing patient equity over profit margins. The Hartwell name stayed on the signs, for legacy reasons, but everyone understood the truth. The empire had shrunk, defanged, humbled. My father, once the unshakable CEO with his name etched on plaques across Denver, lost all executive authority. The board negotiated a transition that allowed him to remain attached only in the smallest, safest capacity, a part-time physician in a community clinic on the outskirts of Aurora, the kind of place where no one knew or cared about his last name. He told acquaintances he chose to return to direct patient care, but inside the family, everyone knew. His kingdom was gone, and he had helped burn it down. Camila's crash was even louder. The investigation didn't just strip her of her title, it exposed her ignorance, her arrogance, her eagerness to bend legality whenever growth projections demanded it. The golden child of Colorado healthcare, as one magazine once called her, became the executive under ethical review. Almost overnight, colleagues unfollowed her. Reporters stopped calling. Invitations evaporated. When the dust settled, she quietly left Denver and resurfaced months later in Florida, selling luxury condos for a coastal real estate firm. She looked sun-kissed and smiling in her new profile picture, but there was something vacant in her eyes, an echo of a spotlight that would never return. As for me, when the investigations formally concluded, I received calls from 5 different hospital systems, each offering me positions ranging from senior auditor to compliance chief. But the only offer that felt right came from a network of community hospitals, facilities underserved, underfunded, but run by leaders who actually listened, leaders who didn't want shortcuts or loopholes, leaders who read my resume not with suspicion, but with relief. I joined them as their Director of Ethics and Compliance, a role lighter than any title I had held before. Not because it was easier, but because it didn't require me to carry other people's wrongdoings in silence. I slept better. I breathed deeper. I walked into work without bracing myself. My new colleagues asked for my input instead of my obedience. They included me in decision-making instead of using me as a shield. And for the first time in years, my job felt like an extension of my purpose, not a burden I had inherited. With a stable income and an emptier heart, I bought a small house on the outskirts of Golden, Colorado, one with big windows facing the mountains and a porch that caught the morning sun. I adopted a rescue dog, a scrappy mixed breed with a crooked ear who followed me from room to room as if afraid I'd disappear. I named him Milo, and he filled a quiet space in my life I didn't realize had been empty. Every morning, I drank coffee on my porch while Milo dozed at my feet, and the sunlight painted the mountains in soft amber. No board meetings, no false smiles, no weight of carrying a legacy that was never allowed to be mine. Some nights I still lay awake thinking about my mother, her voice, her letter, her trust placed in me when she knew she wouldn't be here to guide me. And every time, I whispered a quiet thank you into the dark. One evening, as I closed my laptop after finishing a compliance outline for one of the community clinics, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Genuine, bone-deep peace. In the stillness of that moment, the truth settled in with a soft, clear certainty. They thought suspending me would teach me a lesson about loyalty. Instead, it taught me the one lesson they never expected me to learn: never sell your conscience to preserve someone else's illusion. Freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, steady, earned. And it was mine. Transition to a scene of Elena and her father, perhaps sitting on her porch. Quiet, mature conversation. A full year slipped by before my father appeared again. Not in a boardroom, not in a clinic hallway, not through a guarded email forwarded by an assistant. He came to my house in Golden on a gray Saturday morning, the kind where the clouds sit low enough to touch the mountains. Milo barked before I even reached the door, tail stiff, sensing something unfamiliar. When I opened it, the man standing there looked almost like a stranger. My father, once the intimidating, polished CEO of Hartwell Medical, now stood slightly hunched, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn jacket. Hair thinner and grayer than I remembered. His eyes, once sharp with command, were softer now, shadowed with something like exhaustion or humility. "Elena," he said quietly, "may I come in?" For a moment, I hesitated, not out of anger, but because I needed to make sure my heart was steady enough to face whatever version of him had arrived. I stepped aside, letting him enter. He looked around my small living room, the books, the dog toys, the view of the mountains through the big window, and something inside him shifted. A realization, maybe a reckoning. He sat on the couch, hands clasped. I waited. "The company," he began, clearing his throat. "It's smaller now. The new leadership brought in auditors, restructured departments, stripped away the old branding." He paused. "They even changed the logo." There was a faint tremble in his voice. "Losing an empire doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in waves. But it's still alive," he added, as if trying to convince himself. "Just different." I nodded. "Different can be good." He gave a humorless smile. "I never thought things would go this far. I didn't think your report or the investigation would lead to all of this." I leaned back in my chair. "Dad, it didn't go this far. It was already this far. You just didn't want to see it." He winced. Not dramatically, just enough for me to know the words landed. Silence stretched between us, thick with things we'd carried for too long. Then, gently, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest for years. "Dad, did you protect Camila because she was the oldest, or because she made you feel like you were looking at a younger version of yourself?" He froze. No deflection, no speeches, no boardroom bravado. Just stillness. For a long time, longer than I expected, he didn't answer. He stared at the floor, as if searching through decades of choices for the right place to begin. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "I always thought you didn't need me." He swallowed. "You were so capable, so strong, even as a child. You solved your own problems. You solved mine. And Camila," he exhaled shakily. "She always needed something. Approval, guidance, attention. It made me feel useful." He looked up, eyes glistening, not with tears, but with clarity. "And I didn't realize I was taking those things away from you." I didn't speak. I let him continue. "You were the strong one," he whispered. "I leaned on that. Leaned too hard. And by the time I realized what I'd done, it was easier to let things stay the way they were." Easier for him, exhausting for me. I took a slow breath. "Dad, I'm not coming back. Not to Hartwell. Not to fix anything. Not to repair the public image. None of that." He nodded, almost expecting it. "If you want a relationship with me," I said, steady and clear, "it has to start with listening. Not negotiating. Not strategizing. Just listening." My father's face crumpled slightly, not broken, but softened in a way I had never seen. A man stripped of titles, excuses, and defenses. "Elena," he murmured, his voice trembling for the first time in my life. "I regret that I let my strongest daughter become the one who had to protect herself." For years I had imagined what it would feel like to hear him say something like that. I thought it would hurt or heal or satisfy some buried ache. But instead, it simply felt real. Simple. Human. A truth long overdue. I didn't forgive him in that moment. Healing doesn't happen on cue. But I let him sit there in my living room, in the quiet he never allowed between us before. Outside, the mountains stood steady and unmoving. Inside, something old finally shifted. Transitioned to Elena in her own consulting office, professional, confident. 5, maybe 6 years passed, years that softened the jagged edges of everything that came before. Years that shaped my life into something I once couldn't imagine wanting. The world kept turning, and so did I. By then, I had built something new of my own. Not a hospital, not a corporate empire, but a consulting firm dedicated to the one thing Hartwell Medical had forgotten: ethics born from empathy, not fear. My company specialized in helping family-owned healthcare organizations transition leadership without repeating the quiet generational failures I grew up inside. I taught boards how to separate love from responsibility, ambition from harm, and legacy from ego. Fathers brought daughters to my workshops. Mothers brought sons. Siblings came together, not to compete, but to learn how not to destroy each other. I helped them rebuild what power and pride had eroded. And in doing so, I rebuilt parts of myself. My father attended one of my conferences for the first time on a crisp autumn morning. He didn't tell me he was coming. I spotted him only at the end, sitting in the last row, hands folded, listening with the quiet focus of a man finally willing to learn rather than lead. When the session ended, he didn't rush to the front to introduce himself or pose for a photo. He waited until the crowd thinned. Only then did he approach, slowly, cautiously, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to interrupt the space I'd created. He didn't offer advice. He didn't apologize again. He didn't try to claim anything. He simply wrapped his arms around me in a brief, careful hug and whispered, "You turned your pain into something that helps people live better. Your mother would be so proud." It was not dramatic. It was not the climax of a movie. It was small, human, and real. And that was enough. Our relationship, not broken, not fixed, settled into something honest. We had dinner every so often, the conversations drifting between books we were reading, cases he handled at his clinic, and the tomatoes he was learning to grow in his backyard. The topics we once used as armor, business, strategy, success, were quietly retired. Hartwell Medical existed between us not as an empire or a wound. It was simply something that had happened, something we survived. He never asked me to help rebuild it. I never offered. That chapter had closed. And somewhere in those quiet dinners, in the laughter over shared meals, and the silence we no longer feared, something else grew, a reclamation of what family could be, when ambition stopped suffocating it. Many nights after finishing a consultation session or reviewing governance notes, I'd sit alone in the small office of my firm. No Hartwell crest on the door, no legacy looming over my shoulder, just my name, plain, steady, entirely mine, and a team of people who trusted me because of who I was, not whose daughter I had been. I would lean back in my chair, close my eyes, and let the stillness settle around me. And in that quiet, I found the words that felt true enough to end my story with, the words I now speak to anyone who finds themselves caught between loyalty and justice. My father wanted my apology to keep the peace, to keep the surface smooth, to keep the silence alive. I said, "All right," but not to the game he set. I agreed with myself, because silence in the face of wrongdoing isn't neutrality. It's participation. Sometimes what breaks everything they built isn't betrayal, it's the truth. And sometimes the only revenge you need is to walk away and let them face the consequences of the choices they fought so hard to defend. Years after the boardrooms, the accusations, the investigations, I sit in my own office, sunlight on the desk, Milo asleep by the door, my small team laughing in the hallway. There is no title to fight for, no empire to inherit, no father's approval to chase. There is only the life I chose. And for the first time, the life that finally chose me back. No one can suspend me now. No one can silence me. No one can decide my path for me. For the first time, my future carries only one signature, my own. Final shot on narrator's face, a soft, confident smile, call to action. CTA, I'm curious, have you ever found yourself in a situation where loyalty clashed with your integrity? What did you choose, and what did you learn? Let me know in the comments below. I truly want to hear your stories.